What's up, gamers? I'm the Lights, and I wanted to talk about all of the Season 21 changes in a single cohesive video so we could look at kind of how all the things fit together. With that being the goal, I have now rewritten and re-recorded this video about a half dozen times because Bungie keeps releasing more and more information. But at this point, we're close enough to the season that if they release another article or two, yeah, it is what it is. There are a ton of changes coming next season, and if I went into all of them in depth, this video would be like an hour long with how much information Bungie's dropped. So instead, I'm just going to go over the handful of things that I think will be particularly influential, at least in PvE. If you want the source articles for all of this information, though, and to get the whole picture, I will have links for all 6 of them in the description. And while you're down there, hit that subscribe button, because Season of the Deep is about to pop off here on the channel. I have a ton of content planned. Let's get into the changes now, starting with next season's seasonal artifact. Coming into Lightfall, it was tough to gauge how strong the artifact was going to be with Bungie's new system, where all of the mods are active all of the time, as long as you have them selected. Overall, I'd say the strength of the individual mods are weaker than in previous seasons, since we haven't had anything on the level of like Weakened Clear, Classy Restoration, Particle Deconstruction, or anything like that on these new artifacts. But when you consider all of them together being active at the same time for free, they're way stronger and enable new builds and playstyles that wouldn't be possible without them, like Firebolts from last season, for example, being bolstered very heavily. In Season of the Deep, I think everyone was expecting to see Stasis and Arc on the artifact pretty heavily since they weren't last season. And well, actually, it's just Arc that's been cycled in instead of Solar, and then Void and Strand are sticking around, so Stasis getting no love this season, unfortunately. Out of the artifact mods, I think Void is actually the big winner. There are 3 main Void mods on the artifact. We've got Unto the Breach, kills on a Void debuffed target, create a Void Breach, so that's weakened, volatile, or suppressed are your Void debuffs. It's pretty easy to do. You can make them with Echo of Cessation already. This is basically the same thing, but better. And keep in mind, Void Breaches also give you Devour with Echo of Starvation. Then we have Protective Breach, where picking up a Void Breach gives you an Overshield, or refreshes your current Overshield. And then finally, Supernova. Picking up a Void Breach causes your next instance of Void damage to create a large weakening pulse. So now, killing any of those things that just got weakened by the pulse will give you more Void Breaches, for more weakening pulses, for more overshields, and I think this will be strong on all of the subclasses, but I'm most interested in Sentinel, actually, because this is going to be a lot of free overshield uptime if there isn't some fat internal cooldown or something. Void Titan is at its strongest, in my opinion, when you have the ability to run offensive Bulwark and controlled demolition together while still maintaining high overshield uptime. Last season, we were able to do this by pairing Volatile Flow with Repulsor Brace, and this season, I would argue, Season of the Deep spawns are even better for maintaining overshield uptime with those 2 aspects on. Arc is getting 2 mods that I'm particularly interested in, that I've got my eye on, but the suite as a whole looks a little weaker than Void's for now. We've got Thunderous Retort, which we got back in Season of the Plunder last year, and back then it was a 30% bonus to your super damage if you cast your super while critical HP or amplified, which is pretty easy to do. With the Gathering Storm Hunter super, though, which is one of the highest damage supers in the game, it only actually buffed the initial strike, which made it really more like a 10% buff at the end of the day, so hopefully that's fixed. It'll still be good with like T-Crash, though, and maybe even Chaos Reach, which we'll talk about later, because that's getting some big buffs. The second mod that stood out to me is Shock and Awe, where Arc Final Blows, while amplified, make lightning bolts that damage and apply Jolt, which just seems crazy. This one, it's gotta have an internal cooldown or something, or maybe the lightning bolts won't do that much damage. This seems pretty nuts. I mean, Arc Hunter especially already has slaying power to the point where I actually spent basically the entirety of a 40-minute video explaining why I think you shouldn't use all of it. But I mean, yeah, this mod seems really good. Strand, finally, is Improved Unraveling, which makes Unravel projectiles do more damage, and a mod that gives you Strand weapons unraveling rounds when you gain Woven Mail. Seems really good on Titan. Strand is also getting 3 new aspects. The Wanderer for Warlocks, which makes Tangles suspend nearby enemies when they explode. Tangles will attach to enemies when you throw them, and your Threadling final blows will make Tangles. Seems quite good. Tangle cooldown will keep this one down a little bit, I expect, unless there's a different Tangle cooldown for the Threadling kills creating Tangles. Hunters are getting Threaded Spectre, which spawns a little taunt decoy after dodging that explodes into Threadlings. Seems alright. And finally, Titans got Fleshit Storm.
Fleshit.
Blayshette Storm, which actually looks really rad. You like float in the air and hurl blades. Reminds me of Grubberfly's Elegy from Hollow Knight, and reminding me of Hollow Knight is a good way to earn brownie points. I don't want to speculate too much on the strength of the new aspects because I'm sure they'll be thoroughly picked apart shortly after they release, and it's too early to really tell with how little information we have. We're also getting 2 new armor mods, Powerful Attraction, which sucks up all the orbs of power around you when you use your class ability, and Elemental Charges, which gives a chance to gain armor charge upon picking up one of these subclass collectibles like the Void Breaches that you're going to be getting a ton of from the Artifact, for example. You know, Fire Sprites for Solar, Ionic Traces for Arc, Shards for Stasis, and then for Strand, it's Destroying Tangles. And Bungie said that depending on how frequently these little collectibles are able to be made, the chance of getting armor charge off of them will be increased quite a lot. So, you know, for example, you can make a heck of a lot of Stasis Shards. So Stasis Shards might have a worse kind of conversion rate or percentage chance than Tangles, since those have a pretty long internal cooldown. And there are also a lot of subclass balance changes coming as well. And I don't think any of them are really too impactful. But all supers are getting an additional 20% damage resistance in PvE, and pretty much every roaming super is getting its damage buffed in some way. So, you look at supers like Daybreak, Sentinel Shield, Arc Staff, Spectral Blades. These are all roaming supers, of course, but more importantly, they're very rarely selected in favor of the other supers that these subclasses have access to. Well, of Radiance, Word of Dawn, Gathering Storm, and Tether. Some of these are weaker than the others, of course. Some are stronger than the others. But one and done supers are so overwhelmingly preferable in PvE that the problem isn't really with roaming supers, but rather with how strong the neutral game of each class is currently and how strong the one and done supers are. You see, a roaming super's job is just always going to be ad clear. You know, maybe clutching up a GM and getting a res or whatever, but at the end of the day, they're for ad clear. And the baseline level of ad clear allotted to each subclass currently is so high that they are just redundant. So what you'd rather have is something that you can just get out and be done with that'll help you do what you normally do. Just get back to that. Like, for example, how much better is Daybreak than just running around with Sun Bracers up, really? Like, is it that much better? It's not even that Daybreak is bad. It's just that Well is strong and the subclasses are strong. That's just the kind of a specific example. The specifics of each case varies a bit. There's nuance there, and the classes that don't have a choice of a one-and-done super, like Sunbreaker, Berserker, Threadrunner, those only have roaming supers, they're all gonna like this. Like, it's just a buff. But I don't think any of these buffs are going to be a reason to use a roaming super over a one-and-done on the classes that have a choice. The reason you use a roaming super over a one-and-done is because you just want to, or it worked with some specific weird, quirky thing you wanted to do. And I mean, fair play. That's still going to be the case. It'll still be the only reason to use it. None of these are going to be like the de facto strongest things or anything like that. Chaos Reach, though. Chaos Reach is a weird one. Chaos Reach is almost like a hybrid between a roaming super and a one and done. It does not last nearly as long as a true roaming super, unless you got Geomags and it's kind of close. But it lasts way longer than a one and done. And it's been very weak as a result because it has roughly one and done super damage, but just takes way longer. So you'd be better off just using your guns or your neutral game in most cases instead of using Chaos Reach. Chaos Reach is getting a pretty big buff though to kind of alleviate some of that gap. It's going to apply Jolt now when you just hold it on one target. It's going to cause jolting lightning strikes on that target, and it's getting a 25% damage buff in addition to that. The damage buff alone should get it to at least be a little more in line with other damage supers. Like, I did some quick math, and with Geomags, it should do more than, like, a T-Crash with Kyrus, if I remember correctly. But that's with Geomags on, so it took way longer than the T-Crash to do. So it's really going to come down to the damage of those Jolt strikes to see where it really lies. Both Nova Bombs, additionally, are getting a 20% damage buff, which is good, because Nova Bomb got totally power crept out by Blade Barrage and Thunder Crash as far as burst supers go. Next, I want to talk about exotics, both weapons and armor. For weapons, the two changes that stood out to me is Eyes of Tomorrow is going to refund 1 ammo if you kill 4 or more enemies with a single volley, and that could be pretty nasty. I'm excited to try that. Legend of Acreus, which already does bananas damage, is getting its maximum range and reserves boosted by 1/3. That seems a little crazy. For exotic armor, there are some reworks in there, including Eternal Warrior, which is basically becoming an arc version of Path of Burning Steps on top of its current functionality. You get a stack of a buff that gives you arc weapon damage after getting rapid arc weapon kills. Stacks up to 4 times for a 25% buff, and you get full stacks of the buff when your Fists of Havoc super ends. Thing is, though, and this is true of Mask of Bacchus and Path of Burning Steps as well, the weapon buffs from these exotics are now going to fill the same slot as surges in the weapon buff stacking equation. That is to say, they're not going to stack with surges anymore. And without going balls deep into the whole buff stacking situation, this is a nerf. It's a pretty big nerf. Path of Burning Steps will stack with Radiant now, at least. Still a nerf overall, but it's easy for Solar Titan to get Radiant, so at least it's something. And I have 2 big problems with this change. The first is that some of the most excited I have ever heard people be over build crafting in Destiny is when they find a bunch of big damage buffs and rub their hands together all diabolical and then tell me, oh, I'm going to get 30% from this mod and 50% from this weapon perk and 20% from this other thing, and then my gun is going to hit for 1 billion damage. And then I, not the game, have to crush their dreams and go, those don't stack, and this doesn't stack with this and that with that. And now these exotics aren't even going to stack with surge mods. The most obvious thing to add to a build centered around weapons, which your build will probably be centered around weapons if you're using an exotic that buffs weapon damage. And that kind of brings me into the second big issue, which is we all know damn well they aren't going to have it say anywhere in the game that these don't stack with surges. I would be happy for them to prove me wrong. Overall, not a fan of this change. And finally, the moment you've all been waiting for. Starfire Protocol, after 12 months of facilitating what is quite possibly the strongest build Destiny has ever seen, is getting gutted, and rightfully so. I abused the hell out of this exotic while I could, and enjoyed the hell out of it too. The Starfire Protocol build was one of the biggest strength outliers I think I've ever seen in any video game. So now, instead of giving 20% grenade energy per tick of weapon damage, it'll now give 2.5% grenade energy. So now it'll take 16 seconds to fully get a grenade charge instead of 2 seconds that it takes currently. Weapon kills from an Amp Rift or Well will now give 20% grenade energy, though. That's some new functionality. Probably not going to matter a ton. It's basically like a little bit better than Demolitionist. And, well, you know, over 16 seconds, passive grenade regen is going to help a bit, to the point where you'll really be able to get grenades back quicker than every 16 seconds. It's a big nerf, but you're definitely not going to be throwing as many grenades as rockets in a damage phase anymore. But, you know, average boss fights are like 30 seconds, so you're not really going to get more than 4, assuming you go in with 2 charges. It'll probably be like an okay thing you can do sometimes, but what's really relevant here is Sunbracers is about to shine for all it's worth with Starfire out of the way, and Phoenix Protocol is going to become more popular, I think, as well. But yeah, that's all I really wanted to cover. If you liked the video, leave it a like, subscribe so you don't miss any of the content that's going to be dropping when Season of the Deep drops, and let me know what you're most excited for next season in the comments. Thanks for watching. Deuces.